Video podcast number 2. Well guys, this is actually going to be a response to a certain viral video that went up a few weeks ago. So on today's show, I want to talk about something that we all do. Some people do it when they wake up, some do it a few hours after, and some don't even do it until before they go to bed. And of course guys, I'm talking about consuming herbicide, which probably doesn't sound any better than whatever you were thinking, but it's something that's surprisingly hard not to do. In 2007, it was estimated that 180 million pounds of the stuff was dropped on US fields alone, and of course, this number has only increased ever since. So it's no wonder that people began to question what they are eating. As you always should. After all, you are what you eat. Literally. When you consume matter, which is more than likely composed of oxygen, hydrogen, and most of all carbon, these atoms are then broken down and used to reconstruct the most important person in your life. You. So it's fairly common to look at where these atoms came from last and how they were treated. So if the nutrients are the same, would you rather be eating off of the floor or off of a silver platter? And if you answered the latter to that last question, you might want to ask yourself why, which will probably lead you to the conclusion of bacteria being on the food, which can be harmful to our bodies. For instance, back in the mid-1800s, it was bacteria that nearly wiped out an entire culture. In Ireland, it was bacteria that were carrying the potato blight syndrome, also known as Phytophthora infestans. Due to the weather and a chain reaction of events, the disease overtook the potato crops in Ireland. This forced millions of people to outsource for food and even caused many to move. The disease eradicated a major food source for a very large population, and because of this disease, over 1 million people are noted to have died from starvation alone. But what if we were able to save these crops with science? If herbicides were implemented, would the population even be better off, and would those lives live happily ever after? And of course this begs the question and the main purpose of the video: does the use of herbicide on our food give you cancer? After all, the implementation of herbicides in the 1940s was derived from the use of biological weapons during World War II, because the weapons were actually found to have characteristics that allowed them to target and remove broadleaf weeds from crop acreage. Who knew? But if we look at statistics from the National Cancer Institute, it is cited that the rate of cancer patients has increased 10% in the last 4 years. 10%, guys, that is huge. While books such as The GMO Deception tend to bank on popular opinion and attribute this rate of increase to the use of herbicide and pesticides on GMO-ridden foods. So why would this be? What would cause herbicides to give us cancer in the first place? And to understand this, we have to turn our attention to science. Actually, biochemistry to be exact. The patent on herbicides was taken to the bank when the idea arose to Johnny Franz to block a specific biochemical pathway responsible for the production of 2 essential amino acids in broadleaf plants. Now this biochemical pathway, you should know, is not found in humans. Franz found that the introduction of the chemical known as glyphosate would block the biochemical pathway known as the shikimate pathway in plants and stop EPSP synthase, also known as 5-enolpyruvate shikimate 3-phosphate, from joining shikimate 3-phosphate and phosphoenolpyruvate in order to produce phenylalanine and Thanksgiving Day amino acid superstar tryptophan. Yes, I know that's a lot. Here's the diagram. Take it in real quick. Now that was a mouthful, try and saying that 10 times fast. Without these essential amino acids, the plant cells would then begin to die. But why wouldn't our cells undergo the same issue? Well, according to science, our bodies wouldn't have been affected by glyphosate's knockout of EPSP synthase for over 2 billion years. And if you follow the phylogenetic tree back that far, it will bring us back to our evolutionary ancestors of bacteria. Unlike the eukaryotic cells in animals, bacteria do utilize this shikimate pathway and thus would be affected by glyphosate. And this tends to beg the question, but wait guys, don't we have bacteria in our stomach? And that's where glyphosate related cancer is thought to arise. Colon cancer is rumored to be a side effect of glyphosate exposure, as well as Hodgkin's lymphoma. But before you go out and abandon all your food for non-GMO and organic-based foods for a small loan of $10 million, take into account that you've been consuming glyphosate-based herbicide products since the mid-90s, and the FDA has not found glyphosate to be mutagenic or carcinogenic in humans, as glyphosate samples collected by research and stool samples was actually unaffected by the digestive process and did not react within the body, meaning the DNA in our bodies remained in one piece. Now just for curiosity, let's go ahead and take a look at the molecule glyphosate, with the assumption that we are going to be affected by its toxicity. Now, looking at this glyphosate molecule, it will more than likely be the phosphoryl group that reacts with our DNA structure within our cells. This reaction within our cells will cause problems with DNA due to its changing the form of our DNA and protein structure. After all, when it comes to biochemistry, form always follows function, so after consumption, residual amounts of it goes to our gut where our gut bacteria and microflora attempt to break it down. And since the bacteria would be affected and their proteins and DNA would be folding in irregular matters, well then they would actually lose their function as viable forms of bacteria to our bodies and would end up dying. Our body's digestive cycle would then be thrown out of whack. But since we're actually not affected by glyphosate's knockout, we don't have to worry about this at all. This conclusion did differ, however, in a study done in vitro, where liver cells which filter chemicals in the body did form carcinogenic cells, while a study published by the Journal of Environmental and Analytical Toxicology noted that adverse effects seen in vitro from glyphosate, such as cancer and cell death, have not been seen in studies conducted on mice. So it's pretty likely that there are actually other factors at play, or the strains of bacteria within our bodies are now glyphosate resistant. But one thing to remember about all this research discussed is that we are only looking at one chemical in a concoction. There are always other factors at play in different varieties of herbicide, which may be oncogenic or mutagenic, but finding unbiased information that isn't backed by one side or the other is proving to be increasingly difficult. For instance, the first lifetime study on rats consuming glyphosate concluded in 2012 and had to be done in complete secrecy. According to the French article, the researchers used encrypted emails, phone conversations were banned, and even launched a decoy study to prevent sabotage. And with all this secrecy, the prospective results were staggering. The results countered the effects on a similar study published by the Journal of Environmental and Analytical Toxicology, which noted that adverse effects seen in vitro from glyphosate, such as cancer and cell death, had not been seen in studies conducted on mice. The French study did note that massive tumors and carcinogenic cells did develop in rats after glyphosate's exposure. But this is all nothing that the Environmental Health and Perspectives wasn't able to debunk, as they aimed to find the correlation to glyphosate exposure and cancer incidence in their 53,000 person study, split 50-50 among men and women, in which they actually did not find a correlation between glyphosate exposure and cancer, meaning they had a p-value of under 0.05 or 5%, while the French study only had a sample size of 200. And if you look at the dates between these studies, which are years apart, it is always a possibility that things changed over time, as a study in Environmental Health and Perspectives was published in 2005, whereas the French study was published in 2012. So just a quick recap on the French study. They did find that cancer and carcinogenic cells did develop after glyphosate's exposure, which refuted all other studies published before it. So if this type of conflict is making you a bit skittish from shopping at bulk grocery stores, well then I want you to think about how long you've actually been consuming glyphosate-laced foods. The number is more likely closer to 2 decades of consumption, and it is again very likely that you are fine, but it is no reason to go out and eat anything and everything laced with the stuff. After all, what's true for you may not be true for someone else. Even if that someone else is only 0.001% of the population, you may one day find yourself within that small percentile. All of this research only leads to the conclusion that better agricultural techniques for preventing pest prevalence should always be sought after. And as always, everybody, make healthy eating decisions. The fact is, cancer incidences have still spiked 10% in the last 4 years, and making healthy eating decisions can only help your body. So, what do you guys think, the public, think about this study on glyphosate? With so much conflicting data, are you Googling the closest Whole Foods? Or are you still chowing down on that discount corn on the cob like me? Maybe I'm just being ignorant to the data, but until the next video, guys, I'll see you then.